Reform UK has seen a surge in support, despite winning only 4 seats in the recent election. Does their strong polling signal a shift in voter sentiment, and what does it mean for the party's future in British politics? We are joined today by Fred De Fossard, Director of Strategy at Prosperity Institute. Welcome back to Riks Europe.
Thank you so much for having me, Rebecca. It's great to be here.
So how significant is Reform UK's success in the opinion polls?
It is hugely significant. Britain is not really designed to have a multi-party system. Historically, we have always had a two-party system where you have two major parties, roughly around 30 and 40% of the opinion polls, and then minor tiny parties scrapping around. What we have now is we essentially have three major parties, and the completely new anti-establishment party, Reform UK, are actually leading. So we have Reform, which is around 26, 27 in the polls, Labour, which is in government, which is around 25% in the polls, and then the Tory party all the way down around 21, 22% in the polls. This has not happened in British politics before in this way, and in essentially not for 100 years, when the Liberal Party was destroyed by the Conservative Party and the Labour Party.
And does this indicate a sort of a long-term shift in voter sentiment, or do people think that this is a short-term protest vote?
I don't think it's a short-term protest vote. I think this is becoming quite entrenched. A lot of people have always said that Reform UK, previously the Brexit Party, and previously that UKIP, were essentially vehicles for Nigel Farage, a very charismatic politician and a very able campaigner. But I think what's quite clear now is that it represents a growing and and quickly solidifying sentiment among right-of-centre British voters. And very interestingly, Reform are polling pretty well throughout the entirety of Britain. So in Wales, which is a Labour stronghold and has been a Labour stronghold for a century, Reform are now top of the polls or level pegging with Labour. And in Scotland, Reform are up to third, which is completely unheard of. And previous Nigel Farage parties like UKIP and the Brexit Party polled very badly in Scotland. So the Tories are collapsing in Wales, they are collapsing in Scotland, and they're doing quite badly in England, and Reform UK are benefiting hugely. Interestingly, the Labour Reform is polling incredibly well in areas where the Conservative Party has never historically been able to touch. So there was a by-election in South Wales recently, which is a Labour heartland area, where Reform won with 47% of the vote. These are the parts of the countries which have been represented by Labour and left-wing parties for decades, or possibly even more than 100 years, and Reform UK is tapping in to a great deal of frustration with the two established parties, Labour and Conservative.
What would you say are the main issues that are resonating with the people that have given this surge to Reform UK?
It is overwhelmingly immigration, but it's not only immigration. Immigration is probably the Conservative Party's main specific failing in office. The Conservative Party campaigned repeatedly to cut immigration, and then after leaving the European Union, they increased it, possibly even tripled immigration. So that was probably one of the biggest reasons why the Conservative Party lost millions of votes, and a good 3 million votes at least went from the Conservative Party to Reform last year. But while immigration remains a really important issue, there is a bigger picture at play as well. It's a bad economic situation, high inflation. Obviously, inflation is not 10% anymore, it's around 3.5%, but that's enough to give a sense that living standards aren't improving, that growth has been quite slow. Taxes are increasing and things aren't getting better. And Reform UK are doing a lot of campaigning on net zero and going after green regulation. Because after all, energy bills are rising, and the government themselves admitted this week that increased energy bills is linked to net zero. This gives Reform UK a very, very big opportunity to campaign against green policy as well as established issues that they favour, like campaigning against high immigration.
And could their success lead to a renewed call for election?
So there won't be an election, I don't think, until 2028. It is worth remembering that while the Labour Party are not doing very well in the opinion polling, they have low approval ratings and they're not doing very well in voter intention, they do have over 400 MPs out of a parliament of 650. So they have a huge majority, and so they will likely run as long as they possibly can until 2028 or 2029. I think that there might be all manner of dramas could happen in the Labour Party, ministers changing and all that sort of stuff, but I don't think an election will come early. There is no reason for the government to call an election unless they hit an unprecedented crisis.
And how important is Nigel Farage's leadership to the party's future success?
At the moment, I think very. As I said earlier, I mean, it is essentially a Nigel Farage vehicle, but the opinion polling and the strength of opinion polling suggests that it is becoming a movement beyond him. But Nigel himself is now the most popular individual politician in Britain. When you list approval ratings, he is still in a head-to-head with the Prime Minister Keir Starmer. He is not quite as popular, but when you go across the whole piece, he is quite popular. So he hasn't broken through totally yet. There are certain parts of the country who won't necessarily vote Reform UK, who might still be right of centre because they don't quite have the same cultural background. They might not have the same appeal. But Nigel Farage is increasing in popularity, and he's done very clever things. He obviously has a TV show on GB News, which means he can broadcast his views and his style and his charisma, many nights a week. He's as well as being an MP, and he's done a bit of reality TV as well. So he went on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. So he was there in the jungle in Australia, and that got him in front of a very, very mainstream, non-political audience of voters who were able to see a sort of softer, more genial side of him. So this is proving to be quite an effective strategy. And while obviously all parties need to ensure they are sustainable for the long term, it really is a party which is driven by his character and his charisma.
And what are the biggest challenges Reform UK are facing now when they have a few MPs in Parliament? Is it 4 seats they have at the moment? 5.
Yes, 5. The problem they will have at the moment is that when you only have 5 MPs, being an MP is obviously very busy, you have a huge amount of stuff to do, and there's not enough of them to sort of force votes, or force victories and votes, obviously, because you have such a big Labour majority. They can get a lot of attention in the media. They can do very well on social media in particular. Their engagement on social media online is extraordinary, probably the best of any MPs in the entirety of Parliament. But after a while, there's only a small number of you. There's a huge amount of pressure. Nigel has to be leader of the party as well as an MP. That means their capacity to do things like ask questions, table amendments, is kind of constrained because they're such a tiny party.
Thank you very much, Fred De Fossard, Director of Strategy at the Prosperity Institute, for your insights.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Great to be here.
And thank you for watching Riks Europe.